The next poem we're going to study tonight is Sonnet 130 by William Shakespeare. And I'm sorry if you've heard this before, but William Shakespeare, what a dude! Just one of the greatest writers that's ever lived. And if you've studied Shakespeare in school and find you didn't like him very much, I'm sorry to hear that. But he really is fantastic, and you know, just give him another go. If I had the time, I'd love to make a video explaining, you know, scientifically and methodically just why he is one of the greatest writers that's ever lived. But unfortunately I don't have time. So I'm going to have to limit myself tonight to just talking about one poem by Shakespeare. His plays are better, to be honest. That poem is Sonnet 130. Now it's called Sonnet 130 because it's actually a sonnet. A sonnet, you probably already know this, is a type of poem. It always has 14 lines and a very, very strict rhyme scheme that ends most of the time in a couplet. That's 2 lines that rhyme together. Shakespeare was really good at writing these, and often he'd write these very kind of complicated and interesting sonnets that would have a little twist at the end. And Sonnet 130 has a twist in the last 2 lines. A nice little bit to finish on. It's called Sonnet 130 because he wrote quite a lot of them, and this is the 130th sonnet that he wrote. And sonnets, Shakespearean sonnets, are normally about love. So we're expecting a love poem. A poem where he's going to be writing about how much he loves his babe, his mistress, his wife, whatever, how beautiful she is and how fantastic she is. Because this poem is actually a kind of anti-love poem. It's a poem that's about how ridiculous poems are. Because if you think about it, poetry can be a bit daft. I used to teach in this classroom at my first school, and every now and then buses would stop outside. It was right near the bus stop, and there'd always be this yellow and black bus that would pull up outside. And sometimes I'd be teaching, you know, I'd be getting stuck in with poetry, and I'd say to a student, "Go on, look outside the window and let's do a simile." And they'd see the bus, and I'd say, you know, "Give me a simile to describe the bus." And someone would go, sir, it's yellow and black. The bus was like a bee." And I'd go, "Yes, marvellous, brilliant. It is just like a bee. And the sound of the engine is kind of like the buzzing of the bee." And all the class would get excited. "Oh, brilliant, we've got a fantastic simile." But that's actually just a load of rubbish, isn't it? A bus isn't really like a bee. I mean, you know, you don't kind of see a bus and then sort of worrying about it trying to sting you. You know, there isn't many times that you've tried to get into a bee and ask it to take you into town. But a simile's sort of, kind of a bit of nonsense, really. And that's what this poem's about. It's really about kind of how poetry is basically a lie, a beautiful lie. Love poetry in particular. Because you can love your partner or your wife or your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, all you like, and you can say as many nice things as you want, but you know, it's very hard, you know, to really capture love. Like you could say, you know, I could say about my wife that she's the most beautiful woman in the world, but I can't really say that. She might not be. I've not seen all of the women in the world. That's not meant to sound cruel, but you know, I couldn't say that. I'd love to say that, you know, her eyes are like, you know, 2 blue pools of water, you know, that I just want to dive into, but you know, they're not really like 2 big pools of water. They're like eyes, you know. So the poem is sort of about, looks like it's going to be a love poem, but turns out to be quite insulting. It begins with, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun." Now, "my mistress's eyes are like the sun" is a simile, but it's been interrupted by the word nothing. Nothing like. Now that is the word to pick on in this line. "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun." Not even a tiny little bit like the sun. They're just not like it at all. I mean, if you think about it, if they were like the sun, you'd be like, "Oh God, please close your eyes!" But they're not. They are nothing like the sun. It's a bit insulting. Wait till you move on. "Coral is far more red than her lips red." You know, again, that's like a kind of a comparison here, but he's interrupting it with this sort of simile or metaphor, which is basically a comparison metaphor, a crossing over. Coral is far more red. I pick on the words far more. So far you've got, oops, nothing like, far more. These words that emphasise how completely different they are. Coral is far more red than her lips red. "If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun." You know, dun suggests sacking cloth that was used in Elizabethan times. A kind of dirty, horrible kind of, you know, sort of disgusting kind of browny sacking cloth. You know, and in those days, you know, it was sort of different. Beauty, feminine beauty was seen very differently. Nowadays, you know, if you've got a tan, it's considered to be very beautiful. In those days, actually, it was the opposite. If you were tanned, it meant you were some sort of urchin who had to go foraging around in the fields with your skin all weather-beaten and tanned. But actually, if you were kind of a really fit babe, then your skin would be really pale, because it meant that you were rich, and you just had nothing to do but loll around inside, you know, eating chocolates. So, if snow be white, why then her breasts are done. Why then? It's kind of like he's mocking, why then? You know, what else? Of course her skin isn't white. I mean, nobody's skin is really white. If you disagree with me, go upstairs now and rub shaving foam on your face and then smile. You'll find your teeth aren't white either. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. You know, it's sort of, you think about wire now, there's wires everywhere, wires in your computer, in your camera, everywhere. They're common enough, but in those days wires were often used to decorate pieces of jewellery and very fine pieces of clothing. And if you think about it, wires quite valuable, might have been quite valuable then. I mean, imagine you're really good at metalwork and I asked you to make me a table, you could probably have a go at that. If I asked you to make me a chair, you could probably have a go at making me a metal chair. What if I said, go make me some wire? How would you go about that? Whittling away a piece of wire. So it was quite a kind of, in those days, quite an expensive thing, if it was wire, kind of gold wire. But black wires grow on her head, sort of like you suggest these thick black hairs. Again, it's this sort of disgusting and vile image. I have seen roses damasked, you know, in bloom, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. You know, it looks like he's going to say this beautiful word about her rosy cheeks, rosy cheek, rose-like, anyway, sorry. No such roses. It's like nothing like, no such, all the way through. It's not just not a bit like it, nothing like it. And in some perfumes there is more delight than the breath that from my mistress reeks. Reeks. How could that be good? You know, oh, it's a beautiful reek coming from you today. Horrible word. So this word reeks really sticks out as, again, disgust. It's a love poem, but it has disgust. You might think about, we were talking about Havisham earlier this evening, about oxymorons, reeking, beautiful woman, but he's saying she's reeking, and it's a love poem that's not really a praise or loving at all. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. Not just a bit more, far more. Nothing like, far more. All these phrases that again exaggerate the point. A far more pleasing sound. And yet well I know, as in, of course, I'd much rather listen to, for example, you know, a bit of Skunk Anansie or a bit of Green Day or something like that. He'd much rather listen to music than hear her speak. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. Again, the idea that she's not this beautiful, immortal woman. So far you've got this rather insulting poem. And obviously, as I've said, the thing to pick on is the similes that have been interrupted and those words that emphasise and exaggerate just how little she resembles this beautiful image. And then you get to the couplet. And this really is where Shakespeare shows his true genius. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. Now that's interesting stuff. What he's saying is that despite all of these wonderful poems and these wonderful bits of writing that have been written, dedicated to women over the years, they're all nonsense. Because actually, he loves he's not going to lie, he's not going to say that her eyes are like the sun, but he loves his wife or mistress so much that it's beyond poetry. Get your head round that. This is a man who made his living writing. Specifically writing love poetry and love plays as well. And here he is saying, actually, love is so great that it's beyond writing. Now, there's lots of things you can pick on in this line. You've got, for example, belied. Lied you recognise there. Belied, meaning lied to. And false, which particularly in those days, false meant lies. Are you being false to me, sir? Lies. So he's actually using the word lie twice. Poetry, he's saying, is a beautiful lie. It's not really realistic. And then I think my favourite is this, by heaven. I really like that bit, by heaven, because you've got to understand that this is a guy who made his living writing beautiful stuff. You know, like sometimes I get lost for words, I can't always find the right thing to say. But not Shakespeare. Not Shakespeare. But here he is. He can't think of what to say. By heaven. It's like going, Bayek. By God. And yet, Bayek. I think my love is rare. He's lost for words. Shakespeare is lost for words. Shakespeare. Lost for words. And that just goes to show that she's so beautiful, so wonderful, he can't begin to describe her. So, Sonnet 130, a poem, a love poem, about how love poems just don't cut it.